Let's
Now,
see.
it's recording, Robert.
Oh,
Is
you
blinking.
got it.
Did you do
Yeah, I
something?
did. Okay.
Oh, there you go.
I just hit record, so it may be recording to my computer, and I can upload it for you, Robert, if you want.
Okay, great. Thanks. We'll take up however many
Oh,
gigabytes.
here's one at the bottom.
Okay. Well, everybody, I think we'll start. Welcome to the Berkeley PTA Council's Forum for Candidates for School Board and the election of November 3rd, 2020. I'm Robert Collier, the PTA Council's president. So what is tonight's event? It is not last night's train wreck of a presidential debate, thank God. Nobody will be interrupting or talking over each other or bullying, and we will actually have an intelligent exchange of viewpoints about the subject we all care deeply and intimately about, which is the education of our dear and usually wonderful children. The PTA Council and individual PTAs do not endorse any candidates, although individual PTA members can do so. Our forum tonight is a neutral platform to hear the ideas and proposals for all 6 candidates for the 2 open school board seats, who are in alphabetical order: Laura Babbitt, Jose Luis Bedoya, Michael Cheng, Norma Harrison, Isfandiar Imani, and Anna Vasudev. First, a brief explanation of the PTA Council. So who are we? We are the coordinating body for the PTAs in the 16 schools of the Berkeley Unified School District, and we act as their representative and megaphone in advocating with the district and school board. We meet monthly, currently via Zoom, of course, while each school PTA has 1 voting member representative. All PTA members are invited to attend our meetings. In fact, they're public meetings, so we encourage all members of the public who are interested in our schools to attend. We intend to play a constructive role in discussions about the schools, but also a critical role in supporting the family's voice in our schools. The forum's question and answer session will be managed by our moderator, Hollis Williams, who is one of the leaders of the PTA at Thousand Oaks Elementary School. Candidates will be given 2 minutes for their introductory remarks. The main question and answer session will go as follows, and each candidate will have 1 minute to answer. Hollis will pose a series of questions that he has selected from questions previously submitted by email by PTA members. Then he will choose questions submitted live in the Q&A Zoom function, which I'm sure all of you out there are familiar with. At the end, each candidate will have 2 minutes for closing remarks. All participants, meaning the audience, are muted, but please submit your questions and comments via the Q&A function down there at the bottom of your screen. I'll be the timekeeper, holding up time signals, but I'm sure my job will be a heck of a lot easier than Chris Wallace's was last night. So without further ado, Hollis, take it away.
Great, thank you so much, Robert. Again, my name is Hollis Williams, and I'm a proud parent of 2 children at Thousand Oaks Elementary. I've served on the PTA for about 3 years, and I serve as their membership chair and the BTA liaison, and I'll be leading the moderating for this forum tonight. Thank you so much again. We'll start with the first question, and this question will start with Laura Babbitt. In the wake of activism around sexual assault and sexual harassment, some students demand expulsion and other harsh consequences for students who commit sexual assault and sexual harassment. The district, however, has chosen to emphasize restorative justice as an alternative to expulsion. What do you say to students and to other advocates who argue that restorative justice does not provide severe enough punishment to students who harm others?
Well, when restorative justice is done well, it's done to actually empower the victim and to make sure that the person who committed the offense actually understands their offense and takes the time to actually correct it. So I think first and foremost, we need to make sure that we are getting to the root and the fundamentals of restorative justice before we say that this is not harsh enough punishment. It's literally not meant to be punishment. It's meant to be educational, informative, and a correctional exercise. So for those who are seeking punishment, that would be a different conversation altogether. But I do think that we have a serious issue in addressing sexual harassment on our campuses and in our school environment. And I am looking forward to addressing those with education, with starting at the earlier grade levels, with really looking at how our students are surviving in this rape culture, listening to them, and then doing the educational work that we need to do to change this result. My daughter went to Berkeley High School. We experienced it ourselves, so it's personal to me, and I will make sure that other generations don't have to endure what we did. Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you, Laura. Jose Luis Bedoya, same question.
Thank you for that. I'm a big believer in restorative justice. I think it has a place in society, especially for our youth. It's very important that people understand, the mistakes that they've had and have a chance to actually correct their behavior. So I think that works well for a lot of activities that our youth, engage in. For sexual harassment, and as a parent of someone who experienced, cyberbullying, I think that it puts the onus on the victim when it comes to sexual harassment or, graver charges than that. So I'm not necessarily for that restorative justice for certain things that may be a bit beyond the pale. So I would have to draw the line at certain points where perhaps it's more rape-oriented or those kinds of issues. I think that in those cases, you would have to bring in people from, policing. So again, not that I'm a policing person. I don't think that's the way to do it. But we also need to make sure that we protect all of our children, boys and girls.
Thank you. Michael Chang.
Yes, thank you. As a federal government enforcement attorney, I have implemented policies on sex harassment and restorative justice systemically across school districts. A restorative justice program, when properly done and robustly done with proper staffing, counseling, and counselors, and policies and procedures, is meant to restore the culture and environments for safety, and also a empathetic and allyship-based culture at school sites. What that means really is that both the issue of race equity and also sex harassment with regard to the feeling of safety and also positive cultural environment, they are both important qualities that school districts have to protect. It doesn't mean that one is more important than the other or one trumps the other. When the restorative practice is done properly, it doesn't mean, for example, that a victim of sex harassment must confront their abuser or alleged assaulter. There are different methods for implementing this in a healthy and restorative manner, but it really does require systems in place with the proper staffing.
Great. Thank you so much, Michael. Norma Harrison, your response.
Yes, I'm reading from my Voters Edge site, onto which I have posted a great many ideas about why I'm doing this. I'm doing this to enable people to aggregate over trials, to permit education to be changed from a commodity to life experience for all ages together. I expect people are going to have a great deal of difficulty understanding what I mean. This is not in the common lexicon. And I hope you'll contact me. My contact information is on the Voters Edge site. I'm to work on enabling all people of all ages to be productive members of society, securely and materially well off. I want to work toward building a society that does not require the babysitting that school is, so that any group study experience doesn't prevent attendance by anyone. Now then,
Great.
everyone.
Thank you, Norma.
Is that a minute?
That's been a minute. Thank you.
What happened to the introductory 2 minutes?
Oh, yes, we'll get to that. Let's go to this last question and we can do that again. Thank you, Norma. Esfandi Armani.
Hey, thank you. Yes, I think the key word here is the proper use of and intention of the restorative justice. And for that, the intention is to bring closure to stakeholders in this process. And for that to work, I want to make sure the administrators are not only properly trained, but also have the right mindset in this. Listen, I have a father of 3 daughters who went through K through 12, the Berkeley school system. And when it got to the high school, I could hear it on kind of daily basis, the experience they had on this subject. So it's not something that we want our girls or anyone, our students, to go through on a daily basis, not feeling safe and having to deal with the issues. So the intention is well, but it has to be done, administered properly. Thank you.
Thank you. And as Anna Basudea, your response.
Yes, thanks for the question, Hollis. I agree with many of the points raised by both Mike Chang and Laura Babbitt, that restorative justice, when done well, can be effective. And for that, we definitely need additional staffing. We need to make sure that there's proper professional development in place. We need to make sure that we have a comprehensive restorative justice program. And I know that before the pandemic, this discussion came up at the PTA Council, and we were on track to trying to build out a restorative justice model from the elementary school level to the high school level, right? And I think that bringing us back on track to do that, to have a comprehensive restorative justice program that is well funded, that it has proper staffing, that has proper professional development, is what we need to do as an immediate next step to address this very pressing issue. And I'm very happy that the Stop Harassing Students keep pushing us to do better. We can do better as a district. Thank you.
Again, thank you so much. And Norma, thanks for the reminder. We did skip over interest. Let's go ahead and give you an opportunity to tell us about yourself and your platform and what you plan to do as a board in the Berkeley School District. We'll start with Jose Luis Bedoya.
Thank you, Hollis. Well, first of all, I'd like to thank the Berkeley PTA for organizing this event. I'd like to thank each and one of you watching and taking the time to be part of this event. Look, let me start by introducing myself a bit. I'm a proud parent of 3 BUSD kids, a recent 2020 graduate now studying in Santa Cruz, a sophomore in the IB program at BHS, and a 7th grader at Longfellow. I have been part of the BSEP rep for the high school, where I had the chance to ensure that the music program, as well as many other worthy programs, had the opportunity or the money, the funding to continue the enrichment classes. I'm also on the Disaster and Fire Commission. So what I can say is, through my lived experience here in Berkeley, I have seen the possibilities and the pitfalls of our district. I've been part of Fortune 500 companies, and I've started both nonprofits and been part of tech startups. So I think that I can bring that experience to bear on some of the issues that I see. So why am I running? First, I want to pay it forward. We have to thank the people who came before us. My parents, for whom I started a scholarship at Berkeley in their name, for all the past teachers who have taken the time and seen me and been able to guide me in the future. Look, I'm not a politician, but I do see that we need some changes in our community. So how do we fix this? Well, there's no magic bullet, but I think that we need to return to or be part of an equity-based decision-making. Use real research and evidence to guide our interventions. And the evidence and the research says that early is better. By 3rd grade, you see a disparity of all the ethnic groups based against the white black ethnic group. Academic excellence. So we need to use all our resources, not just the school resources, but we need to bring to bear all the city, county, state resources so that we can more effectively address that gap and more effectively and be better able to provide an excellent academic experience for our kids. And last and not least of all, accountability. We need to keep on track. We need to hold ourselves responsible. We need to hold ourselves to account. I think at this point we have let these things be such a big gulf between, thank you for that. So accountability, please, for more details, look at my webpage, bedoyaforschoolboard2020.com.
Thank you, Mr. Bedoya. Mike Chang, your intro. Tell us about yourself.
Yeah, thank you, Hollis. Yes, my name is Mike Chang. I'm a proud parent of 3 kids in the district. Actually, one is also a 2020 grad at Berkeley High School. I've had kids for 10 years in the district, from kindergarten all the way through graduating high school. Been quite of an experience. Met all of our best friends there. Education is community. I was also a VP of an executive board at one of the schools for several years. Also, my family are just very involved in supporting our educational system. I'm also an education law attorney with the federal government, a civil rights attorney, and a lecturer at Cal in ethnic studies and legal studies. and a commissioner on the Police Review Commission. Through these experiences, I understand the value and great importance of governance boards and committees in terms of providing transparency to the public in running policies and systems for our school system in particular. With regard to my plans as a school board member, I believe that equity and quality can be achieved together and that they're inseparable, and that a robust restorative justice program of the sort that I've implemented across the state of California in a variety of large school districts and small school districts can be put in place in a manner that provides both a prompt and effective response to sex harassment issues and also reduces hostile climate problems, but also can reduce and mitigate the 6 to 1 times more likely that African-American students are suspended or expelled from schools than white students, and the fact that white students are 1.7 more times more likely to take an AP course than a Black student. That's the definition of an opportunity gap. It just requires systems and procedures and some culture change, and we're kind of partway there in the district. We did Vision 2020, as lots of folks have been discussing, but it wasn't quite implemented quite yet, and I'd like to help the school board and the district to get there with that. And also I believe that our public schools should be fully funded through housing trust, for example, for affordable housing. I just saw Robert put a huge stop sign up on my thing. So thank you very much, Robert.
Great, thank you, Michael. Let's go to Anna Basuda. Tell us about yourself.
Great, thank you, Hollis. Thank you to the Berkeley PTA Council for having me here today. I know most of you who attend the meetings regularly already know me as the Vice President of Equity and Inclusion on the Council, a role which I enjoy very much. It's great to be here as a candidate for Berkeley School Board. I'm the proud mother of 2 boys enrolled in Berkeley Public Schools. I'm a first-generation college graduate who grew up in a Nicaraguan immigrant family. I know firsthand that all our children can reach their full potential with the right support systems in place. As an active Berkeley parent, I have fought for our students by advocating alongside the Berkeley Federation of Teachers to pass measures E, G, and H. By partnering with Walk Bike Berkeley to pass Vision Zero to keep our children safe on their way to and from school. And by serving as your VP of Equity and Inclusion to give families of color more of a voice in decision-making processes for our schools. As a professional Safe Routes to School leader, I currently oversee a district-wide program to ensure that 55,000 children can get to school safely. I will bring practical government experience and strong fiscal management skills to this position. As a member of the school board, I will work to continue to fight to close the opportunity gap for our most vulnerable students, including African-American learners, Latinx students, and students with disabilities. I will fight so that our educators can make a living wage, and I will advocate for safe, affordable, and sustainable transportation for our students. I'm also the only candidate here endorsed by the entire current school board, and I also have the endorsement of the Berkeley Federation of Teachers, Senator Nancy Skinner, Mayor Jesse Arreguin, former Mayor Tom Bates, the supermajority of City Council, and numerous Democratic clubs, including the Alameda County Democratic Party, Berkeley Democratic Club, Wellstone Democratic Renewal Club, East Bay Young Democrats, and community groups like Latinos Unidos at Berkeley. Please visit my website at annavasudev.org to learn more about my campaign, and mil gracias.
Thank you, Anna. Let's go to Laura Babbitt. And you're on mute. Let's unmute yourself.
Okay, now I'm unmuted, right? Okay, so let me get started. Good evening, everyone. My name is Laura Babbitt, and I am the proud parent of 3 daughters who have attended or still attend Berkeley schools. My youngest is in the 5th grade. I was raised by educators who modeled creating change in our community. This is why when I learned of the huge opportunity gap in Berkeley schools, I felt the call to action and responded. Over the last 10 years, I have spent at least 40 volunteer hours a month working on all of our major district committees, from BSEP to the Superintendent Budget Advisory Committee, PTAs, and school site councils at every level. Through this activism, I have helped to implement support versus discipline, social emotional counselors, family engagement specialists, special education support and reform, English language learner support, the hiring and retention of teachers of color, and I've stopped budget cuts for educators. In response to COVID-19, I realized that leading from the sidelines was not going to be enough. We need a finance expert on our board to help navigate the financial pressures the impending recession will bring. For the last 25 years, I've led million to billion-dollar entities through 2 recessions by making data-driven decisions and creating efficiencies which reduce costs and save jobs. Through the lens of equity, I am committed to create accountability structures so that our programs and special education services are implemented effectively. 2, provide outcome-oriented budgeting and cut red tape. 3, build collaborative, welcoming school environments, which includes trauma-informed care and instruction. In closing, after years of constituents asking me to run for the school board, the time is now. I'm endorsed by the Berkeley Federation of Teachers, the Alameda County Democratic Party, Asian Pacific Caucus, Latinos Unidos, 6 out of 7 school board directors over the last 10 years, a supermajority of City Council, State Senator Nancy Skinner, Supervisor Keith Carson, Mayor Jesse Arguin, and a host of other unions, community leaders, and residents noted at laurababbitt.com. Thank you for your time and endorsement consideration.
Thank you, Laura. Norma Harrison.
Yeah, can I have another 30 seconds too, like anybody else that took it? I've been involved with school things for about 83 years. I started nursery school and then went to school and became the teacher at some point, a whole bunch of other kinds of activities that have to do with education, including having children. I understand that everyone wants us all to be able to take care of us all so that we can all be secure and comfortable in our life processes and in our living situations. We all want that to be available for all of us. The profit system, however, militates against that because mutual care interferes with profit. Our owners find every way to prevent that we are able to take care of ourselves. Further, they find that the advantage that church provides alienates us from each other, from ourselves, and offers charity. Capitalism requires charity. We are not permitted to enable ourselves, us all, to provide the joys of life forever to and with us all. That's why we're indoctrinated with the mindset from the cradle to hate and fear communism and socialism. I'm a 3rd-generation communist. I work with Peace and Freedom Party and a number of other organizations for socialism, communism. School enhances these forces, the alienation. It requires competition. It makes some of us failures so that those must accept their beating down, thereby worrying everybody else. The rest of us kneel to this requirement to grow, to be able to make profit for our owners. But we're all communists. Give us a chance. Part of this conquest by the owning class is achieved using the totally commonly accepted age segregation. Children go here, middle adults, thank you, go here, old adults go here, which is preposterous. We belong together for whatever circumstances, in whatever formations suit whatever activity we engage in. Stop the preemptive segregation and sorting of us that is done through the brutal schooling system to put us in order for the profit system.
Thank you, Norma, for that. And last but not least is Fandi Aramani.
Good evening. Thank you very much for the time and opportunity. I'm Svandi Aramani. I'm proud parent of 3 daughters who attended K-12 in Berkeley Public School. 2 of them in Cal right now, and youngest one just graduated from Berkeley High School. I'm a 1st-generation immigrant. I came here when I was 17. My parents and siblings were left behind because of revolution and war. I worked and supported myself throughout college. I did my undergrad and graduate studies right here at Cal, and this is where I met my wife and settled down for the past 30 years. I love this city for its diversity and progressiveness. My wife and I are both products of public schools. We believe in public education, so when the time came, we had no hesitation to enroll our daughters in Berkeley Public Schools. Over the past 20 years, I've been very much involved in hands-on in numerous aspects of Berkeley schools. I was elected on BSEP committee, and I was also a member of BUSD Planning and Oversight Committee. Separately, I've led and worked with a group of parents, scholars, and California State Board of Education to change the K-12 public school framework, which was adopted July 2016. While my family and I had positive experience with Berkeley schools, we have also witnessed firsthand serious issues in the system. We already talked about sexual harassment and abuses, particularly in Berkeley High School, achievement gaps throughout the system, racial inequality and biases, and of course, the existential climate crisis. If I'm elected, I will work hard with my colleagues and key stakeholders to address these issues. Professionally, I've led projects worth several $100 million dealing with budgeting, negotiation, and building alliances among various stakeholders. With my professional expertise in risk management, I will bring pragmatic solutions and approaches dealing with root cause of issues and come up with early preventive measures which could cost a lot less than trying to deal with symptoms in late stages. Thank you again for the opportunity, and I appreciate your time.
Great, thanks everyone. On to more questions. The next question we'll ask Jose Luis Bedoya. The Berkeley Police Department currently pays for one uniformed resource officer who works full-time at Berkeley High. No BUSD funds are spent on this school resource officer. Do you think BUSD should continue to allow the resource officer to work at Berkeley High? Why or why not?
Short answer, no. Look, I actually asked my daughter the same question, you know, whether she feels safe for having a police presence there or, you know, not having that. And she said, look, actually having somebody with, weaponry or of any type at the school feels dangerous in and of itself. And so why would we want to have that police presence, that intimidation at the high school where we know that, you know, in fact, you know, the police presence in general in our society has actually been used more against people of color. So I don't agree with it. I don't think it's the right thing to do. There are other ways to solve that problem.
Thank you. Norma, same question.
Okay, governments don't want a population capable of critical thinking. They want obedient workers, people. This is George Carlin. Have you ever seen his program? You look it up, George Carlin, and you get these comments, which are lovely. He wants people dumb, just smart enough to run the machines and just dumb enough to passively accept their situation. You have no choice. You have owners. They own you. They own everything. They own all the important land. They own and control the corporations. They've long since bought and paid for the Senate, the Congress, the state houses, the city halls. They got the judges in their back pockets, and they own all the big media companies. So they control just about all of the news and information you get to hear. I am again a candidate on the November ballot for the Berkeley School Board. My intention is to use this office to let us come before us the contradiction that U.S. institutions like those throughout the world are retaining and advancing efforts to continue subjugation of populations, the de facto enslavement.
Thank you, Norma. Thank you. Anna, should we continue to allow an SRO to work at Berkeley High?
Thanks for that question, Hollis. No, I don't think that there's any situation that merits an SRO at one of our schools. We're talking about children. And I've worked really hard in my career actually to remove SROs from transit, from buses in San Francisco. We have a restorative program called the MTAP program, where we try to build trust with students to report things like gang violence and fights through a restorative way instead of going through an SRO like many other districts have. And so my short answer is no, there are better means. And again, it comes down to better funding for a full restorative justice program, a more comprehensive restorative justice program in our schools.
Thank you. Esfandiar, your thoughts?
Yes, emphatic no, and that's the kind of answer I'll get from my three daughters also who attended Berkeley High School. You know, we don't want to go to the path militarizing our schools. So I came from a country that's how they operate there, and this is not the path we want to go here. I mean, just because the national leadership want to take us there, we don't want to go there. And so definitely I'm against that, and there are better ways to address safety in the school.
Great.
Thanks.
Thank you. Laura, your thoughts?
So I'm actually of a different opinion than most of my constituents, mainly because I know the SRO at Berkeley High School, and most of the families who he would be helping stay out of the system, I know as well. He's an African American male, and we have children who go to show them his homework. He is literally a part of the community. And that is what you want on your campus, right? You want community officers who are doing the work to actually keep people out of the system, right? So we don't have any data on how many people he's kept out of the system. And I think that is extremely important because he knows their families, he knows how to call home, and he knows the students. What's even more scary is the thought that if people were to call the actual police, what will happen? Because the actual street police throw our kids on the street just for jaywalking right now. So as a parent of an African-American child, and because this is an African-American SRO we're talking about who understands our community, he's important. Thank you.
Thank you. Mike Chang, SROs at Berkeley High.
Yes, thank you. So this is a complex area, as you can see. But in general, more counseling and restorative justice focused services is a preference to law enforcement on campus. Law enforcement on campus has the outcome of, in general, generating disparities on the basis of race. As Laura noted, there's a particular SRO at BHS who is of African ancestry and that many students can relate to. I recognize that and understand that in particular situations on a case-by-case basis, circumstances may be unique. However, I think that in general, if we have a strongly trained restorative justice-based set of counselors, that kind of friendly face can be relatable and provide those services at the SRO that Ms. Babbitt reference is currently providing in some sense. However, you also have the Berkeley Police Department right next door. So some folks were concerned about, there's always these scenarios. I'm on the Police Review Commission with regard to safety. If you need it, it's there, but you do need a friendly face who knows how to de-escalate too. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Next question, we'll start with Anna. The current school board has made many tough decisions. Are there any decisions you disagree with? And if so, what would you do differently?
I'm trying to think of like the most controversial decision where we stepped in recently. I recently stepped in around materials distribution, but I don't think this was a school board decision. I think this was an issue that needed clarification from the sites, where there were some school sites that were saying that the only way to pick up materials was via car. And I know Sylvia Mendes sent an email out. There were about 3 sites. Berkeley High was pushing materials pick up via car. And I stood, I made public comment on behalf of the PTA Council against that, because I think it's very important that, there are a lot of parents that are transit dependent, low-income parents that don't own a car, and the car is not going to shield you from COVID-19. And so I did go to the board and I spoke against that policy, and I also worked on the back end with the health department to make sure that it was changed. And so, there on transportation matters, I don't always agree, especially because there are lots of equity issues regarding transportation. I mean, without proper transportation to our schools, you get additional truancy. And so I think that on some issues, what I'd bring to the table is, think of the school day not just when the student shows up at 8 o'clock. The school day starts when you step outside your door. And I think that, that's knowledge that we need on the board.
Great, thank you. Ms. Vandiar, any decisions you disagree with from the school board?
Well, probably it's not a recent one, but I heard about, when I was in the BSIP and the PNO, about the 2020 vision, right? And the achievement gap. And we are in 2020. Actually, 2020 is coming to an end in 3 months. And I think the achievement gap's still there. It hasn't changed in terms of, whether it's a decision or it's more of a strategy and implementation of this, that is, I don't think has produced what the intention was. So this is where I have difficulty with. I think this was, again, many of these measures are well intended, but the implementation and execution are poorly done.
Great, thank you, Esfandiar. Norma.
Right. Working with the many projects that involve school and fixing it up and teaching, I kept having to promote the traditional tactic that people are to utilize school in order to achieve goals that were supposed to be satisfactory to themselves and their communities. People, the students and parents and teachers, were never able to attain the structures that felt good. Thus, the constant insistence on reform. Reform has not yet, in 180 years of it, provided satisfactory schooling. Various understandings, including intensive and constant research and experience, suddenly enlightened me. I was overcome with the recognition that it is school itself that is the problem. The institution requires the overall education of the person who attends and of their family, both with whatever they've had as education because of part of their life is dismissed, and education becomes what happens in the classroom and what gets degree papers. Both families and communities and students are obligated to become an other in order to fit the requirements school has in order to meet the demands of this social system.
Thank you, Norma. Laura, any decisions of the school board you disagree with? And if so, why?
Well, as an advocate for equity in results, there's been many decisions that I have disagreed with over the last few years, especially when you look at the results. But the most recent decision that I ultimately disagree with was the $9 million on hand washing stations. We do want to return to school safely, but we can do that for a whole lot less than $9 million of our construction bond money for hand washing stations. I understand it involved piping and a lot of work, but there are the cost benefit analysis of that for this temporary short-term issue does not bear out. There are many other alternative solutions that we need to explore, and I'm happy that as a community we pushed back and now they are revisiting that decision on $9 million for hand washing stations. Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you, Laura. Michael, your thoughts on disagreeing with the school board?
Yes, thank you. As a federal enforcement attorney, I have not insignificant concerns about the Title IX prompt and effective response in this. In the past recent years, we've had publicly noted incidents of students putting the names of alleged assaulters on bathroom walls and onto Instagram, etc. When it gets to that point, that suggests that something has not been responded to in a prompt and effective manner. So that is an area that I have great concern with. I know the district is trying to work on this, but it's lagged on for a number of years, which signaled to me that some systems are not appropriately in place. They need a second Title IX coordinator, they need more investigators, and this all can be tied into a restorative justice-based program to support students in general and also to resolve a hostile climate problem on campuses. And certainly that $9 million that Laura just referenced for hand washing stations, that kind of money can go towards at least several counselors for restorative justice, I think. So we need to be very careful of our priorities, particularly in a moment where funds are apparently scarce, but also to advocate for full funding. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Jose, your thoughts?
Thanks for that. There's so many that it's kind of difficult to pin down one, but let's go with the most salient one, which is the initial response to COVID that the district had, coupled with the fact that, the Longfellow principal left in the middle of the semester. So there's been a consistent cultural intention by the organization, by BUSD, where it seems like we as the parents work for them as opposed to them working for us. The responses are always that we have to do this, we have to go and find the resources, we have to find where the Ed Hub is, where this is at, as opposed to there being a service-oriented entity. So for me, it's a number of decisions that have led to a cultural norm whereby the district feels more technocratic, and it feels like they're the ones, we're the ones that are working for them as opposed to they working for us.
Great, thank you. And I want to remind the audience to please submit your questions in the question and answer section. If we have time, we'll go to those questions and pose those to the candidates. Norma, we'll start with you on this question.
So the demands of this social system.
We're going to do it with the new question, Norma.
Oh, okay.
Thank you.
I've got
Thank you.
I've got enough for everything, huh?
I know. The question is, special education costs are skyrocketing in BUSD, as with many other districts. As a board member, how would you approach containing cost while still providing needed services to students and allowing staff to have smaller caseloads?
Yeah, well, I've suggested another way of working, and that is to do things together instead of all this segregation of age. So that what's necessary now is, by this structure, is to provide submission to a de facto slavery system that provides profit, wealth, and power to the few people who own it. And I'd like you maybe to look up Casey Gerald, who was interviewed by Van Jones, with whom some of you are familiar. Put those two together, Casey Gerald on Van Jones, where he talks about having to leave a piece of oneself behind. Who you are, who your people have been, who your community is. Those are not the things that we take into school. We have to become satisfactory to fit in, as I've described, in a very negative way, which includes the wars and the tests. We have to know how to do the tests.
Great. Thank you, Norma. Jose, to you, special education cost. How do we fix this?
So it's actually a really complicated question, because we want to, on the one hand, provide better services. On the other hand, maybe provide lower caseloads. That seems to be antithetical to, lowering cost. So let's put that out there to begin with. What I think we can do is maybe rely on some technology where, maybe people can be tracked a little bit better in terms of their EIP or their 504. Just as an example, it took my son forever to get a 504. Why? Because there wasn't a streamlined process to be able to do that. So his needs were not met until his senior year of high school. Those are the kinds of programmatic things that I think that, we can easily solve through some efficiencies, through some technology. That said, if we want to have a better, special education, there is no way to have it other than to have a group of people to reduce the size and spend a little bit more. There's no silver bullet there.
Great. Thank you. Expandiar, how do you solve this issue?
Yeah, I agree. It's a very sensitive issue, actually, and challenging one. Also, I agree that definitely, given the technological advances, we should leverage that. But also, we should leverage existing resources. I say this over and over, and we are living in a city that homes to one of the top universities in the world, right? So when it comes to experts and technology advancements, definitely we should tap into that. But also, most importantly, we have about 40,000 bright students that attend this university. Even if we tap into a small portion, 1% of it, that's going to bring 300, 400 students willing with energy to help us with these sensitive issues as well. And that kind of resources could be put in different areas too. And definitely streamlining the process in terms of the time and hopefully reduce the cost as well.
Thank you. Laura, how do you solve this cost-saving issue?
Well, I think we need to first start by redirecting our funds from lawsuits and legal fees and do special education correctly. Provide the services that we are required to provide by law. That immediately will increase our funding for special education. And as a school board director, I plan on taking my advocacy skills to the next level and really advocating at the state level to ensure that public schools are fully funded. It's something that we talk about forever, but I haven't really seen the advocacy efforts go forth. So I'm looking forward to making sure that we really hold Governor Newsom and all of our other elected officials accountable for fully funding public education. Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you. And Anna, your thoughts?
Great question, a question that's really near and dear to my heart because this is a priority area for me as a mother of a son with an IEP and as someone who recently went through what feels like a very polarizing process. And I think that Ms. Babbitt correctly alluded to, the kind of lawsuits that happen that cost the district a lot. I think we need to depolarize the conversation a bit, make sure that we are properly staffed, that we have more special education staffing dedicated to caseload reduction, to support with testing and make sure that we have, assessment load reductions. And I know that through the recent campaign measures, there's funding for 5 additional SPED staff. We really need to prioritize the hiring of additional staff, start early intervention, and make sure that the process itself is not so polarizing. I've talked very openly about the need for culturally competent and culturally relevant IEP process, where we bring the OFI staff together with the assessment team to talk to parents in a way that's a lot less polarizing. You're gonna get a lot less fighting if you don't come to the table like this at an IEP. And I've been there as a parent. It's a very hurtful process. And I think that if we put a little more work in meeting parents where they're at and stop, the polarization that happens at IEP meetings, we will lower our costs.
Thank you, Anna. Michael, how do you contain cost?
Yes, I'm in line with Laura and Anna here. As a federal enforcement attorney, where a large portion of our caseload is on special education and disabilities, individuals' disabilities, I see a unforced error here in terms of the cost, and that is the use of outside counsel and the cost associated with litigation. There is really no reason to litigate most of cases involving Section 504 or individuals with IEP programs. They can be addressed through a adequate and sufficient and reasonable response through teachers and staff. And that is a staffing issue in particular with special ed. But if you jump directly to litigation, it increases the cost exponentially. And there's really no reason to use outside counsel for this. This is an observation I've had about the district for some time, that we're using outside counsel for responses that can be handled internally and provide access for individuals with disabilities. We have to remember that students with disabilities are a protected classification. So it's not a matter of shrinking caseloads, it's to ensure that the law is implemented to provide them with access and protections. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you. This next question will start with Anna. On September 18th, 2020, Superintendent Brent Stevens announced that Berkeley Unified School District would not submit a waiver to reopen our elementary schools, while the county transmission rate were listed as widespread. Do you agree with this decision? Why or why not?
Yeah, I think at that point, the superintendent was citing county-wide data, and I think he was right. We weren't in the red at that point when he made that announcement. But as someone, I work professionally on COVID-19 response for schools in San Francisco. There's a lot to figure out for public schools. Like the only, schools in San Francisco that have been allowed to open right now are the private schools, and they have a small volume of students, right? So figuring out contact tracing and testing for a school with 11 to 20 students, possible, doable. The scale that we'd have to figure it out for public schools is a lot larger. I think we should start talking about a phase entry. I think there are vulnerable students that need to come to school faster than other students, absolutely. But I think that we need to do it responsibly. I think we need to answer the testing questions. I think we need to know if we can afford the testing questions. There's a lot of logistics. And I think, the schools that have been allowed to open, because I know which ones they are, San Francisco has a publicly available dashboard, so you can look them up. They're private schools where the volume of students is really small. We also have to take into consideration our labor partners and make sure that they feel safe coming to school, right? It's a lot more complicated for public schools to be able to reopen. And so I support the superintendent's decision there, but I think we do need to start planning like other districts are doing for a phased reentry.
Thank you, Anna. Thank you. Esfandiar, was that decision correct?
Short answer, yes. I would go, especially with the COVID and pandemic public concern, definitely with the public experts, public health experts, data and science, not just by opinion of administrators necessarily. So hopefully it's gone based on that data, and the data shows that it's still not containable. So to me, also safety is the foremost objective here. So even if one person, whether it's a student or a teacher, safety is utmost important. Totally, it's a very unfortunate situation that we are grappling here, but we shouldn't rush into it. And just, like I said, follow the directives that we are getting from the data, from the science and public health experts. And that would be that. So like I said, short answer, I support his decision.
Great, thank you. Norma, same question.
Testing is a very bad idea. It's a very insulting idea. Again, it's kind of handed down from church. They're going to judge us. No way can a teacher teach to each child's willingness, nor to their ability, nor to their interests, all of which change or stay the same over time from day to day, hour to hour, or not at all, depending, not if they have 20 children or 5 or even just the 1 or 2. Children are not asked. They are put through free compulsory education, as a 13-year-old explained. This education needs also deny that students' other learnings, customs, experiences, as I've described, are not education. It insists that school is the source of learning, of education. Education is made into a package we're forced to buy into. Commodification is the rule in capitalism. Form people into workers, which will then go robotically to make money for our owners.
Thank you, Norma. Thank you. Ms. Babbitt, do you agree with Director Stevens' decision not to submit a waiver to open elementary schools?
Well, the decision is actually irrelevant at this point because we are past the coloring where you actually even need a waiver. So it would have been labor intensive and not actually cost effective for us to do so. But I think the heart of the question is, how are we going to reopen schools and how do we go down that road? And the science for outdoor classrooms is very good, and we need to be providing at least our earliest learners and our essential workers these options to return to school. And so I am very disappointed at the level at which we are, the progress we are towards reopening schools. We've known about this since March, and just last board meeting, they hadn't even had a conversation with our health department on what we need to do to really open schools. So it just doesn't even feel like we're moving in the directions that especially our earliest learners and our parents who can't work remotely really need. We can do small group learnings, we can do contact tracing, and we can do testing, and we need to get it right. Thank you so much.
Thank you, thank you. Jose, your thoughts?
Thank you for the question. So in short, you'll notice I like to answer the question. I fully agree with the superintendent's decision. It was methodical. It was based on science. It was based on best practices. We in Berkeley perhaps have a lesser contagion rate than the rest of the county, but we are not an island. We actually travel to different places within the county. So taking an example from my alma mater, Cal. We know that it's expensive, it's difficult. They're doing daily checks at the dorms. They're checking effluent. They have all these kinds of scenarios set up for us, for them, to make sure to keep the infection rate. And then, not to talk about a difficult subject, but the differential impact on Latinos. And as we have seen and read, that there's a huge impact on Latinos that nobody seems to want to talk about too much. And I would like to say that, for all future openings, as Laura said earlier, we need to keep in mind that we need to have technology as part of the solution. We will have technology as part of the solution. There's no putting toothpaste back in the tooth and back in. So we need to figure out how to do this better, how to implement better solutions, how to make sure that we are science-based as we go forward. That's it. Period. End story.
Thank you. And Michael, your thoughts?
Yes, thank you. It needs to be data-oriented and metric-driven and based upon the medical science. I agree with the superintendent's determination. It's unfortunate that the issue of when and how we return and who returns has become politicized. This is not a political issue, or should not be. It should be an issue of medical health and delivery of programs and services for education. There are certainly those students who are in need, and it's very difficult for their parents. This is clearly exacerbated the social inequities across race and socioeconomic status in our society. These are things that need to be considered, but in terms of the actual threshold for when we decide when it's appropriate to go back through a phased return, this has to be done based upon a solid set of metrics and science, and not upon a politicization of when to return. I am a teacher myself at Cal. In the middle of March, we all went into remote learning. My kids are at home too, remote learning. I certainly would want stakeholders such as the union and the teachers to have a strong say in whether or not they are required to go back or not. I am certainly not ready to go back to my work environment in San Francisco. Thank you.
Michael. Thanks, Michael. And actually, we're going to stick with you for this next question. What are 2 or 3 initiatives or strategies would you enact to decrease the achievement gap that exists for Latinx and African American students in the district?
Thank you. Great question. So for starters, I really think that a restorative justice program that's properly implemented, kind of pulling on the thread of Vision 2020, is absolutely critical. And during shelter in place and with the cutbacks and all the programmatic access issues that we have going on to remote learning, I'm very concerned that we're going to fall backwards and have yet another generation where we have these numbers again of the 6.1 times of African American students more likely to be suspended or expelled than white students, with that opportunity gap revealed through the AP disparity as well. There are things we can do now and to prioritize them now, because not only are they compliance-based in terms of legality to ensure that inequities don't continue and we don't generate more lawsuits that are then paid for by outside counsel, generating further costs that are unreasonable and unnecessary. These are things we can program in now and think about in the long term and also implement in the short term to improve the opportunity gap and to address these issues. But starting with the restorative justice program that addresses these issues would be the first line.
Thank you. Thank you. Laura, 2 or 3 strategies to decrease the achievement gap for Latinx and African American students.
Thank you for that question, as I've been working on this for the last 10 years. And what I've seen is Berkeley to implement many of the strategies that are research-based, but not actually fund them with fidelity or hold people accountable or adequately even educate the staff who are supposed to implement these initiatives. So we really need an accountability structure so that when we hire people, when we budget for a position, we actually know the expected outcomes related to them. We know who's owning that initiative, who's monitoring that progress, and how we're going to actually get there. We also need to actually implement our equity rubric. It is a fantastic research-based rubric that many of our staff worked on, and it has just sat on the table like many of our other equity initiatives. And we need to get a family engagement specialist at every school full-time, and that is a huge help in closing the opportunity gap. Whenever we can increase expectations, improve parent education, and bridge that gap between the parent and the student, we're on the right track. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Laura. Jose, 2 to 3 strategies.
Parent, student, and teacher.
Yeah, so I've been involved in business trying to manage large organizations. So, and I'm not going to get every point here. Let me just ask people to go to bedoya4schoolboard2020.com. But equity, academic excellence, and accountability. So from an equity perspective, we need to look into evidence-based information and evidence. And look at the evidence that we have. We know that by 3rd grade, that kids of color are not doing as well. We know that there's a lot of fundamental support that is necessary. So we need to look at that early on. The second thing is academic excellence. So we should look at something like the Promise Neighborhood initiatives that have been done in other districts. And then again, going back to accountability. So I think what I'd like to do is to try to think about this from a problem set where you need to benchmark and see what other people are doing well. There are other people who are doing well in California. There are other people who are doing well in the East Coast, and we need to model ourselves on best practices. That's it.
Great. Thank you. Anna, your thoughts?
Yes. So as someone who runs a district-wide program for San Francisco Unified and believes very firmly in evaluation, I will tell you that the 2020 vision lacked the proper evaluation to make sure that we were holding ourselves accountable for closing the opportunity gaps for Latinx students and African American learners, and also for students with disabilities. So what I would do is I would, have a new iteration of the 2020 vision, but with strong evaluation. So on an annual basis, when we have a pilot program, we see what's working and what's not working. Districts have scarce resources, and we need to know what's working and what's not. I would bring in strong evaluation partners like the School of Education at UC Berkeley, which we use in San Francisco as part of Safe Routes to School. Bring in UC Berkeley as an evaluation partner. They're in our backyard. And, you know, I think it's really important that as we think of closing the opportunity gaps, that we partner with community-based organizations. We have, you know, we've talked about PCAD and a district-wide framework for African-American students. We haven't worked enough with Latinos Unidos, and we don't have a district-wide framework for Latino students, and we need that in place as well. Latino students are also falling behind. So I think, you know, making sure that our advocacy groups, that our community-based organizations are part of the table and holding the district accountable like they are at SFUSD is really important.
Thank you, Anna. Esfandiar, 2 to 3 strategies or initiatives to decrease the achievement gap for Latinx and African American students.
Yeah, thank you very much. As I mentioned earlier, about the well-intention of this program, the 2020 vision, and as reiterated by a few of the colleagues here, that that we're closer to this program, the result, unfortunately, is not there. It's evident, it's not there. So we could continue doing the same thing, maybe even putting resources in there, but that's not going to solve. So my perspective and my approach into issues is root cause approach. What are the key drivers that are contributing to this undesired event, right? Some of them, you might jump to conclusion, we know this, we know what's going on. We know what's going on with the Latin or African-American student body, but not jumping to conclusion, go deep down root cause analysis on this. Second, that I totally believe in family engagement, leverage that many of these issues are all well connected. The family, students, teachers, provide that kind of support among the three.
Thank you, Esfandiar. And Norma, your strategies.
Right. Speaking of robotically, we get people out of these schools who will even go to kill people, ostensibly for our owners, ostensibly for our country, which it no way is. I'll tell you, and I can help you discover why I say so. The Second World War was started by our owners, the rich. It was the permission of Hitler to march south because they wanted him to overthrow the communist revolution. It's an extensive kind of study. Teachers, albeit unintentionally, guide students to give up their humanity in order to conduct our owners' wars and jobs, which are just not lovely. School is a bad place to force anyone to go, regardless of moments of pleasure and learning there. You tell people we all hate school, they go, oh no, I love school.
Right, thank you.
That's selective amnesia.
Thank you. All right, this next question, we'll start with Anna. The English learner master plan of the district is out of compliance. What is your proposal for getting a new English language master plan done, and how do we know it's working?
Well, we need to prioritize getting it done. I mean, it's been outdated since 2013, I believe, so it's very much outdated. I know this is a priority from speaking to the superintendent. Obviously, we have a pandemic, so you know, there's concrete things that have you know, taken precedent, but it's important to bring it. And I think a successful English language master plan to me looks like a plan where we have heritage language learners, where we have a pathway for Latino students who might have not started in the bilingual program, but to be able to access the program. Because the program is not just about language. The program is about cultura, right? The program is about cultural competency and relevancy. And I think it's very important that we have a plan that fits the needs of Latino students too, and students, you know, that want to learn Spanish. So I think working really closely with the community, making sure that the updated, you know, ELL plan has been vetted by community groups like Latinos Unidos at Berkeley, and making sure that we prioritize it is very important because it's sat on the back burner for a long time. I know there's new staffing at the district that wants to prioritize this, so it's not like the district doesn't want to prioritize it. The district knows it's moving forward. We've just been hit with a pandemic, but I think, you know, making sure that it's something that's working for our Latino families, because currently they're not being served.
Thank you. Esfandiar, same question.
Would you please repeat the question? Thank you.
Yes. The English learner master plan for the district is out of compliance. What is your proposal to get this master plan done? And how do we know it's working?
Good question. Totally agree. It's just not the, my 3 daughters were fortunate that they all went through the dual immersion program from kindergarten to elementary school. And it's not just about learning how to speak and be fluent in Spanish. Like Anna said, it's the culture. It's the cultural sensitivity. So the sooner we do this properly and get the students benefit from that program, the better it is. So I would definitely add resources and fight for that to be part of the ongoing and sustainable resources.
Great. Thank you. Michael, your thoughts on the EL master plan?
Yes, thank you. This is an area that I work on in both my government work experience, but also as an ethics studies lecturer and as a civil rights advocate. As a first generation Asian American, this is very important to me. English language learner, issues with regard to bilingual education and push-ins or pull-outs for the accommodations for what is a protected classification. So when we're out of compliance, that suggests that we're not doing our due diligence to ensure that we're providing equitable access to a particular protected classification. This is an area that requires prioritization, even during shelter in place. This is another example of one of those things that cannot fall off the plate that could generate additional liability and use of funds from the district budget for outside counsel that are totally unnecessary. They can be managed through free counsel through the federal government and the California Department of Education. Effective communication is a baseline standard for this. Since the 70s, through a Supreme Court case that emerged out of the Asian American community and out of ethnic studies, this has been a standard that's been established, and the district really, that's a priority that, if on the board, I would also focus upon too. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Michael. Norma, your thoughts on the EL master plan?
Okay. So if you don't understand, if you can't think of the way to employ the ideas that I've been putting out there, let people live integrated instead of segregated by age, among the other segregations that go on. Live among people of all ages, doing various skills and interests together, including showing people who can't how to read and write and calculate, showing on the job, whatever that activity is, showing each other. Testing is a bad way to do these things, figure out whether or not one is succeeding at something. Being together with people and working on a project together means evaluating it oneself or with others who have the ability to put the action into operation, to learn, to teach and learn how to do it. A person can learn to read in 3 weeks.
Great. Thank you, Norma. Thank you. Laura, your thoughts on the EL master plan? How do we get it done and update it? And how do we know it's working?
So the English language master plan is something that we have worked on with the parent advisory committee, really trying to monitor the progress of our English language learners and their supports needed. And I think we need to first make sure that we adequately partner with DLAC, which is our district English language learner group, and really listen to the feedback and implement what the parents are asking for, what the needs that are being communicated. We need to recognize that we have far more English language learners than just Spanish, and we need to make sure that all the needs of all of our constituents are included in that plan. We need to make sure that we don't keep excuses like the pandemic. The pandemic is not an excuse, in my opinion, that we can't get an English language master plan going. So we just need to put in the accountability structures needed, set the goals, and get our employees to work, making sure that we can arrive. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Laura. And Jose, your thoughts on updating the EL master plan?
Thank you for that question. It's actually something very near and dear to my heart. Let me start by kind of stating the obvious. There is no master plan. It's not prioritized. There is no emphasis on this. There is, anybody who has been through the Longfellow program or who has gone to Longfellow knows that what we did is essentially consolidated all the schools into one place. And what that's done is basically, taking the problem and put it somewhere else where people are learning, supposedly learning Spanish. But it's a difficult situation because the resources never actually accompanied that movement or transition. Bad planning. And, to start a plan, we'd have to actually, bring together experts. My policy team is basically from the UC Berkeley School of Ed. We have a bunch of folks who are advising me on this issue, but I can tell you that, the attitude in general has been that TWI is a handicap. It's not. Multiple languages are possible. Europe does it. Asia does it. I don't see why we can't either. So it's not a handicap. It's actually something that to be had.
Thank you. Thank you, Jose. That concludes all of our early submitted questions. Thank you all for your comments. We really appreciate them. We have a little bit of time to go to some questions submitted to the Q&A. We'll read this first one. It is, now that it's clear that there is a technology gap and it's a big factor in the achievement gap, what's your plan to remedy this after COVID-19? We'll start with Michael.
Sure. The digital divide, that is an antiquated sounding term, makes me sound old, but that's an issue that is, obviously is tied to and aligned with social inequity. Certainly the district needs to continue and should continue to ensure access to hotspots, et cetera, during shelter in place. Obviously, Wi-Fi, broadband is very, very important. Hardware as well. I don't think they've done a poor job at that. That is a compliance issue to be able to access programs and services. And so this is an example of why compliance and regulatory laws incentivize behavior. And pushing back against them it honestly wastes time and money. And so in terms of looking forward after shelter in place, there are programs that can be put in place to continue through our community partners access to hardware and Wi-Fi moving forward from here. Thank you.
Norma.
Right.
Go ahead.
So marshaling students through all these steps begins when you have to wake the child up in order to get to school on time so that you can march in line when the bell rings. And the folks have to put up with having done that. Parents don't like to have to wake their children out of sound sleep in the morning and send them off, except that the folks have to hurry up and get to the job. So that's, complicates life. The marshaling continues throughout the days, again, at great discomfort. Humbling continues for the lesser student, not only in the classroom, the hallways, the washrooms, the lunchroom, but on the playground. Bullying as usual. Failure is feared. How horrible that failure is allowed. But that's because church is a school-derived event and it's continued. You have to judge people and see them having fault. Children especially, but must not be forced to be judged failed. These contradictions confuse even those children who are able to appear successful. Watching other students behave what's called incorrectly encourages even the child who is doing well and to accept the standards of self-oppression. They don't want to fail. They have been enabled not to.
Thank you. Thank you, Norma. Laura, the question is about the technology gap and how it affects the achievement gap. What's your plan to remedy this after COVID-19?
Well, thank you so much for that question. One of the things that I've done in my volunteer activism is I was the leader of Parents of Children of African Descent for many years. And so we highlighted the digital divide in those efforts. And we partnered with our supervisor, Keith Carson's office, and we actually provided computers for all of our Berkeley Technology Academy students and for many students across the district. And those are things that should have been happening and continue to happen once PCAD had reached its threshold. So when we start a process, we need the district to really pick those things up and to implement it so that there's a routine system involved in making sure that all of our students have the technology that they need. And so that's what we need to do now. Now that we know most of our students have a laptop, they have a hotspot, we need to keep track of those, keep our maintenance up, keep our records going, keep communicating with those families, and put someone in charge to make sure that that those services continue. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Jose, the technology gap and the achievement gap, how do we fix it?
They are very much intertwined, that's for sure. Look, love to have more budget to spend on people and spend our kid on, you know, on computers, on Wi-Fi and all that kind of stuff. I think it's the right way to go. But we also need to, you know, realize the fact that government is not necessarily the best purchasing agent. And, you know, they're terrible at it. They're not necessarily the best. But what I would do is to actually partner with technology companies. There's lots of companies out there here in the Bay Area, the 5th or 6th largest economy, who are willing to provide services, who are willing to provide hardware. If we were to ask, if we were to partner, if we were to give them some credit and accolade and continue to move that, you know, that partnership together. There are certain things that we can do as Berkeley, as taxpayers, you know, but there's also a threshold that we won't be able to overcome. So I think it's time that we look at partnering outside, partnering with companies and doing some non-traditional models of how to bridge this gap on a technology basis. There's no reason why we in Berkeley, we in California, we in the United States cannot do this. It's ridiculous. We need to do more, put more effort into this issue.
Okay. Thank you. Esfandia, how do we bridge the gap between technology and achievement?
Thank you. I hope you and the audience realize that many of these questions, including this one, are shedding light on the issues that on this art event that could have been mitigated a lot cheaper and at the earlier stage. Again, this pandemic, public health, caused surface some major shortcomings of the society, and this technological divide is one of them, of course. But we also provide the opportunity to rise above and learn and use best practices. I also agree, like we are in Silicon Valley. This is not acceptable that to be even discussing this, that our schools are like a third world country in terms of when it comes to technology access. I did volunteer throughout the pandemic, delivering and distributing computers, food. These are like, you know, basic needs, should be like basic needs that should be provided, and we shouldn't be reacting to it. So I totally agree that we have to reach out, we have to use the leverage on the resources available and do a better job to be ready for next event.
Great, thank you. Anna, your thoughts?
Thanks for this question, Hollis. This question came up 3 weeks ago. I hosted a joint forum with Mayor Arreguin, and we talked about like city and school district partnership to improve the technology gap, right? And we discussed the feasibility of public Wi-Fi, and you know, as Jose Luis and Esfandiar have brought up, public-private partnerships are being discussed. We know that there are gaps in South Berkeley and West Berkeley. It doesn't surprise me. That's where our kids of color live, right? And so we know that these gaps exist. We know that there is support for some kind of public available Wi-Fi, and there are conversations. But I also think what some districts are done in San Francisco, I work on the community learning hubs, and you know, to look for places where children who have technology issues at their home can go and do their work, right? So that it's not at home, so they can have better Wi-Fi access. And so San Francisco has tried to do this. We're 7 months into the pandemic. We should have figured this out. But you know, we should figure this out sooner rather than later. We should have places where, you know, if children need better access to Wi-Fi, pandemic or not, there are places where children can go and do their work.
Thank you so much. I think we have time for one more question we have from the audience here. Anna, we're going to stick with you on this one. I'd like that you talk about access. This question deals with middle schools and inequity. How will you address the current inequities in middle schools at the district level, and do you support rezoning?
Great question. You know, I think that for any rezoning process, so that's another issue that's come up in San Francisco as part of the transportation challenges. I know they went through a lengthy community engagement process for their rezoning. So I think that needs to happen first and foremost, make sure that there's a comprehensive community engagement process before rezoning. But I think there are gaps in our middle schools, and I've been very vocal as, you know, the VP of Equity and Inclusion on the PTA Council, you know, fighting to make sure that Longfellow has equitable funding for resources, and I know, and facilities funding, and I know this has come up within the council. Like, there is a disparity between our middle schools, and we need to fight hard for Longfellow. We need to fight hard to better support the PTA at Longfellow. You know, the disparities amongst our middle school are there, and they're very real, and they need to be addressed. And I've gone to bat for Longfellow as part of, you know, the VP of Equity and Inclusion on the PTA Council, and I will go to bat for all our middle schools, you know, as a school board member, but make sure that the distribution of resources is equitable. I think the rezoning question, those are two different questions, right? I think the rezoning question is something that's more complicated and deserves, like in every other district, a comprehensive community engagement process before, you know, I tell you my personal opinions on rezoning. I need to hear from the community first. That's what a responsible school board member does. You listen to all sides before coming out with your own personal agenda.
Thank you.
Well done.
Laura, same question. Inequities in middle schools. And do you support rezoning?
Well, this issue is very near and dear to my heart because I was a part of a group that started a Longfellow advocacy movement, if you will, to make sure that the needs of Longfellow were addressed. And so the data reflects that if you have a high concentration of needs school, you have two options. One is that you send it a high concentration of resources to address those needs, or the second is you do balance the school body so that the needs are also balanced. And that is what we need to do for Longfellow. If we are going to keep a high concentration of needs school, then we need to send it the resources and fully fund it so that its teachers have an equitable life to their teachers at King, for example, who have less students with higher needs in their class and have a higher PTA who can actually supplement more of the needs in their classrooms. So we really have to be strategic about equity when it comes to Longfellow. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Norma, let's go to you. How do you
Sure.
address current inequities in middle schools, and do you support rezoning?
Okay, getting back to some substance. Children suffer through the early grades, often having cried at being left by their dear people. They get a kindergarten diploma and later an elementary school diploma, and a high school diploma, and a college or university degree, or one or another levels, and fit into some 8-hour-a-day stifle because they have that scroll. And then they spend short or long periods doing those jobs. My brother failed first semesters of school sufficiently that he was not permitted to enter the program where he could become a physician, which is what he wanted. So he got a master's degree in parasitology, parasite, a master's in world health, a doctoral in world health, trying to think of perhaps traveling to some remote areas of the world and helping people with infestations. Ended up his last couple of work decades selling AAA insurance, and grateful to have that. A child was his boss and frightened my brother throughout my brother's time there. In no way my brother is different from many employees.
Thank you, Norma. Thank you for that. Esfandiar, your thoughts?
Yeah, thank you. You know, I think the equity and all these gaps, it brings my point. Like, we talk about middle school. I know the questions are middle school, but you know, 1% gap in elementary school will translate to 30% gap in middle school, and then 60% gap in high school. So again, that's why my point is we need to address these issues earlier in the year. So it's going to cost later more and take a lot more time. Having said that, the other thing we really haven't talked much tonight, I don't think is teachers. You know, I struggled when I was in middle school. I struggled with mathematics. It was a teacher who turned things around for me. And a few years later, I graduated from Berkeley in applied mathematics. So given time and resources, we could have, you know, a lot of teachers and a lot of resources, and still all it takes, the students fall behind. but we could still have qualified teachers who can turn things around for students and make them achieve their highest potential. So I wanted to highlight the importance of teachers. We really haven't talked about teachers at all tonight. And this is a PTA council.
Thank you, Esfandiar. Thank you. Michael Chang, your thoughts on inequities in middle schools, and do you support rezoning?
Thank you. Obviously, inequities in middle schools are across Berkeley are something that are tied to socioeconomic factors with segregation in our town, residential segregation, and also gentrification in Berkeley. So, you know, I am open, and I think it's great that the board is considering revisiting the middle school assignment system, and it should come through a very close review with stakeholders. It also must comport with prioritization of improving services at each school, specific to the population at each particular school. Longfellow in particular has a great program with the dual immersion language program, and that should be supported as a big attractor, as a kind of magnet program in the district. The elementary school system, its assignment program comports with Supreme Court law with regard to race-conscious programs, and it's actually a very good model nationally for how they structured that assignment program. I think they could consider doing the same with the middle school system. There are Supreme Court rules in particular with regard to how you do that, and they looked at that closely for the elementary school system, and I think it's done a good job integrating the elementary schools. But we have had a lot of changes in the past 20 years, and they should be revisited, those assignment programs at the middle school. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. And Jose Luis Bedoya, your thoughts on inequities in middle schools, and do you support rezoning?
Let's start with the last question first, so rezoning. I love the idea of what Berkeley is trying to do with its zones. That is to make sure that you don't have a group of poor people, a group of rich people, and some, you know, nobody in between, because that's where we are at Berkeley. That's where our socioeconomic status is. So I like the idea of mixing folks together. So I think at this point, what's happened is that that model seems to be falling apart a little bit, especially when you put, you know, high needs people into Longfellow and TWI only into Longfellow. There is a resource gap. There is a, you know, just a gap of understanding of what's happening there. In terms of TWI, let me just say, I'm not sure that's a great program right now. I think that it's a program that's suffering, that needs to be resourced and thought up a little bit better than it currently is. Making sure that you have the adequate teachers who can actually speak Spanish and mathematics and other civics, you know, type of classes. And that's not present right now. So yes, I would support the rezoning. And yes, I think that we need to figure out how to minimize the gap for middle schools.
Great. Thank you so much. Thanks to everyone for participating today. We are running a little bit over time, so with your grace, I'll ask you to give us a few more minutes so the candidates can submit their final thoughts to you. We'll give you 90 seconds to submit your closing arguments, and we'll start with Norma.
I've just moved my piece over. I've got something here that I would like to share with you at the end of this event. People don't get a chance socially or alone to take an honest look at the social structure to determine among each other how it's done or what it is that has happened to us. My intention is to give people the chance to say they don't like what's happened to them, what's happening to their children, to their brothers, what could happen if the structure were inclined to let us form lives for ourselves among each other that are under our own control instead of control by this terribly brutal social system that we're all told from the cradle that we love. America the beautiful, God's blessing. Ha, ha. I think there are people here who are able to form together these understandings and the altogether other social formation in which we can live meaningful, pleasant, comfortable, secure lives from the time we're 2 through 102 or more. Age segregation is antithetical, worthy or enjoyable living. It is essential to the profit system, capitalism. We need to set up alternative living that feels good for all of us to do. This requires working to end profit
Thank you.
and get rid of failure, get rid of judgment and separation of content.
Thank you, Norman. Thank you so much for those closing thoughts. Michael Chang, your closing thoughts, please.
Thank you. On the school board, I will bring my subject matter expertise in compliance with regard to equitable outcomes. In addition, I will bring to the school board my background as a Cal lecturer in ethnic studies with a PhD in ethnic studies to bring forward to an empathetic and restorative and allyship-based culture to the district. In particular, I'm very concerned about continuing a progressive model for Berkeley because this is a town that's very unique. We are grappling with all sorts of things with regard to gentrification, continuing residential segregation and shelter in place. But I think that there are, just by the candidates who are represented here, we have smart and empathetic and critical minded people in Berkeley, and we can do this together, working together. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you so much. Jose Luis Bedoya, your final thoughts.
I love the way you say that. I need to record that and put it on my website. Look, what I'd like to try to do here is to reinvent how we do school. We are, right now, we have a COVID-19 pandemic that gives us a unique opportunity to rethink how we do school. I like to think about it from a cradle to college perspective. Give kids the option to do that. Not everybody may fit that rubric, but at least give them the option to do that. And give them an option where we as parents, we as administrators, we as board members are actually paying attention to the fact that the current administration, the current board members have effectively failed the majority of our kids. So I think that's something that we need to look at very closely. So I am used to running large organizations. I'm used to changing cultures. I'm used to doing these kinds of things. And so that's what I would bring to the board. And that's what I think is needed. So my plan, if you look at my website, bedoyaforschoolboard.com, equity, academic excellence, and accountability. Equity, we need to make sure that we have the unmentioned people that we've talked about, somebody mentioned earlier, have a good professional development for our teachers. We need to look at all the government to bring all the resources that we can to bear on the problem. But more importantly, we need to make sure that we are accountable to each other. We are accountable to our students. We are accountable to the taxpayer. We have been lucky in Berkeley. We have had lots of people who said, yes, I will raise my hand and pay more taxes. But there is a limit for that, and those days will end. So we need to be careful and make sure that we spend the taxpayers' money effectively. Thank you.
Thank you, Jose Luis. And next we go to Esfandiar Imani. Your final words.
Thank you so much. Now, I truly believe in that the issues that in our school system are very much related and reflective of our society. How can a student perform well if schools are not safe, or if their family are struggling with basic needs? And how can teachers bring their best if they are not compensated or appreciated properly? With my professional experience and expertise, I bring in risk management. I bring in other skills that I have in budgeting, negotiating, building alliances, and working with the key stakeholders and my colleagues to address these issues. My platform is on addressing the safety in schools, equity and racial inequality, and of course, the existential climate crisis. Please visit my website at imaniforschoolboard.org. Thank you so much again, for everyone, for your time and attention.
Great. Thank you. And Anna Basuda, your final comments.
Thank you, Hollis. Thank you for a great job facilitating tonight. As the only candidate with the endorsement of the entire current Berkeley School Board and the only candidate with direct experience overseeing COVID-19 response efforts for our schools on a professional level, I would be honored to serve our schools during this challenging time. My life experience as a first-generation college graduate and an English language learner gives me the unique perspective of navigating the school system as a member of our most vulnerable communities. I understand firsthand the institutional barriers that our most vulnerable families face, and I'm committed to addressing these as a school board member. Lastly, this election for school board is very important. Our only Latinx school board member, Beatriz Leiva Cutler, is not seeking re-election. And it's important that we have a school board that represents the diversity of our student body, with 21% of our students being Latino. With the endorsement of Latinos Unidos de Berkeley and many other elected officials and organizations, I'm looking forward to being a bridge between our school district and Berkeley's Latinx community. I hope to have your vote for one of the 2 seats for BUSD School Board Director. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Last and certainly not least, Laura Babbitt, your final thoughts.
Well, thank you all so much for your time this evening. And I am running for the Berkeley School Board primarily in response to COVID-19. I will work to ensure students can return to school safely, as I have for offices all around the world. I will help BUSD navigate the financial pressures of reduced funding and establish programs and services through the lens of equity and accountability for all students. I am the only candidate that has years of experience on all our major district-wide committees. I have the endorsements from the Democratic Party clubs, including the sole endorsement of the Asian Pacific American Caucus of Alameda County, and am endorsed by BFT. Why? Because these are times which call for someone who can hit the ground fully understanding the intricacies of BUSD funding sources, its programs, its strengths, its faults, and its personalities. Adding my experience as a financial and operations controller and an advocate for equity and results, I am the candidate who can help BUSD navigate this unprecedented time as we re-engineer our schools. I am convinced that we can boost academic outcomes, social emotional development, increase funding for public education and its educators, and yes, ensure every student has an equal chance to succeed. Please visit my website, laurababbitt.com, get a yard sign, volunteer, make a donation, and most importantly, vote and tell a friend to vote Laura Babbitt this election. Thank you all so much.
Great. Thank you all so much. It has been an honor and a pleasure to sit with you over these last few hours. I really appreciate all of your time and effort. We want to give a final thank you to Laura Babbitt, Jose Luis Bedoya, Michael Chang, Norma Harrison, Esfandi Aramani, and Anna Vasudev. Again, it's been my pleasure and honor. Please visit their website. Remember to vote this November. And our final thoughts we'll give to Robert Collier, our president of the Berkeley PTA. Robert?
And thank you, Hollis. Thank you. I was trying to clap for you too.
Yeah, thanks, Hollis. Thanks to everybody. This has been a wonderful, really substantive program, especially delicious after last night. I keep coming back to that train wreck, but this was so refreshing, and it gives me hope for my son, who's now in 5th grade, and for all of our children, that they will be in good hands, no matter who wins. And now I think most folks have put their websites in the chat. If you haven't, please done so.
You know, the chat is going to close when this screen closes. So if anybody wants what's in the chat, there is a place opposite all panelists and attendees, or opposite the name, where there's 3 little dots. If you click on it, you can record the chat and save it. Or you can run your cursor over the whole chat list, copy it, and put it on your
The chat is being
device.
saved. The chat is being saved, and this whole thing is being recorded.
Great.
Yeah.
So, so you can, if you didn't get enough, come back online. It'll be on the, I'll send it out. It'll be both posted on the PTA Council's website, which is berkeleypta.org, and we'll send it out to probably most of the people who are attending are on our listserv. We'll send it out there too, the link to the recording, so you can stay up all night watching it and rewatching it. So again, thanks everybody. And
Thank you, Rob.
good luck.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Rob. Thank you, PTA.
Bye.
Everybody vote.
Bye.
Good night.
Thanks, Hollis and Rob. Thanks so much.
Thanks. Good night.
Bye.
Everybody have a good night.
Robert, can
Yes.
I ask you a question now that the
Yeah, sure. Go
thing is
for
over?
it.
You said that the chat will be saved. How are you making sure that that happens? I think I need to know. If I'm wrong, I need to know.
Because I hit save chat. So,
Oh,
No,
yeah.
you're correct, Norma, in how you do it.
Oh, okay, great.
Yeah.
Thank.
so that's good. Presumably it'll be saved.
Yeah, no, it's saved. I've done that many times. It's just that it gets, you have to know where to go to look for it in your computer.
Right. Right.
Okay,
Well,
thanks.
as
Bye.
Joe
Thank
Biden
you.
said last night, inshallah.
You did a really good job, Hollis. Thank you so much
Really?
for
Gracias.
repeating the
Thank you.
question. Thank you so much for repeating the question so much. So we
Yeah.
didn't have to say,
Wow.
can you repeat the question?
Did everybody get the note where we're shown
Hey, Mike.
that?
Mike, you should email me so we can connect.
Yeah, definitely. I'll send you. I thought I sent you before, but I'll resend it again.
Okay.
Let's
We're
connect.
shown
All right.
that
Thank you.
Biden said inshallah after
Bye. I'm logging off.
what's his name?
Me too.
Trump got up there and said, no, I paid many millions in taxes, many millions. And in the background, you hear inshallah.
Yeah.
And you know what that means.
Yeah.
As if.
Maybe, God willing. Yes.
Have a
Well,
good night.
that's,
Right.
no, it's so be
Okay.
it.
Good night,
is
everybody.
one, but it also means, yeah, you said so, yeah.
And thank you to Norma.
Thank you.
Really appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks, everybody.
All right, bye-bye.
Good night.